Okay, this is the final graphing problem for the review. This is number 8 on your review, and we are graphing an ellipse. And again, this is from 7.2, so be sure you have completed that section and done a really super bang-up job on that. So, we are graphing the ellipse, and we have two different formulas for the ellipse that we have to remember, and it is on your graphing, your formula sheet that you're given with your final exam. But we have the center of our ellipse. It looks similar to our circle. So it's going to be x minus h squared. And then we're going to have y minus k squared. All of that's going to be equal to 1. Now, depending on if it is a up and down ellipse or a left to right ellipse, determines what our a value is and our b value. Now, in this particular ellipse, it is going to be an up and down ellipse. So our a value is going to be under our y, and our b value is going to be under our x. Now, that could be reversed if it's a left to right ellipse. So you do want to make sure you've kind of got that idea of when it's up and down and when it's left to right. So be sure you let me know, or you review that before your final. So what we have to do is we have to get this formula into this, or this equation into this format. And we're going to do that by completing the square. And completing the square on an ellipse is a little bit more complicated than completing the square on a circle. So we are going to go through that process now. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take these numbers up here, and I am going to get my x values together. Okay? And I'm going to erase this formula because we've got a little bit of work to do to get there. So I am going to take my original problem, and I have 4x squared, and I am going to pair it with my 24x. Okay, and then I'm going to leave a little space because I am completing the square, and then I'm going to put my y values together. So I have y squared minus 2y equals negative 21. Okay, so I could go ahead and complete the square with my y values because I have a coefficient of 1. However, I can't complete the square yet with my x values because I don't have a coefficient of 1. So what I have to do with my x values is I have to factor out that 4. So I am pulling out the greatest common factor. So I will be left with x squared plus 6x. And I'm going to keep that in parentheses to remind myself that everything inside this parentheses has to be multiplied by 4. And that's going to be a big deal when we start adding that value to both sides. I'm just going to rewrite my y values now. So let's go ahead and complete the square with my x. So I look at my b term, or my middle term, is 6. So in order to complete the square, I take half of 6, which is 3, and I square it. So I have completed the square right there. Now, one of the things that you are going to want to do is you are going to want to add 9 to both sides. But it's super, super important that you realize that we're not adding 9 to both sides. We have to multiply that 9 by 4 because everything inside this parentheses is being multiplied by 4. So I'm actually not adding 9 to both sides. I'm adding 36 to both sides. Okay, and that's because we factored out that 4. So be sure you let me know if you've got any questions about what just happened there, or if you're having trouble with that on your homework. We're now going to complete the square with our y. So I have y squared minus 2y. I take half of my negative 2, which is negative 1, and I square it. Okay? And so because I added 1 over here, I'm actually adding 1 to the other side. Now, our y values aren't being multiplied by anything, so it stays at just a 1. So now we're able to factor. So I have 4 times x plus 3 squared. Okay. Then I have my y values, and it's y minus 1 squared. Then when I add everything up over here, I'm actually going to end up with 16, because I have negative 21 plus 36 would give me positive 15 plus 1 would give me 16. Okay, now, at this point, this formula has got to equal 1. So I am actually going to divide everything by 16 so that we can get this ellipse equal to 1. Okay, so I have 4 times x plus 3 squared over 16 plus y minus 1 squared over 16. Here, this 4 cancels. Erase that. I don't want you to think that's a negative 16. Okay, so this 4 cancels. We get a 1 up here and we get a 4 in the bottom. So at this point, we have our formula for our ellipse so that we can graph it. Okay, so we are now in the correct format. We are able to identify our center, our vertices, and our foci. So again, I want you to remember that here we've got x plus 3 squared. The formula is x minus h. So our x value of our center is going to be the opposite of that. So it's x minus negative 3. So our x value of our center is negative 3. Now for our second part, we have y minus 1. So our y value is just positive 1. And I am going to go ahead and put that right there on our graph. Now, I want you to look closely about how underneath our y value we have 16, and underneath our x value we have 4. That's what determines that our ellipse is going to be an up and down ellipse instead of a left to right ellipse. Our major axis is going to go up or down, and our major axis is the square root of this right here. So the square root of 16, that is going to be our a value. Our a value is going to be 4. So I am going to go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is going to be my major axis. And our vertices focus on our major axis, So my vertices are going to be negative 3, 5, and negative 3, negative 3. Those are my vertices. Now, our b value is what's underneath our x, because it is our minor. It's the smaller axis. Our b always is associated with our minor axis. So the square root of 4 is 2, and so that dictates how far to the right and how far to the left I go. Okay, and so that's the minor axis. Now we are not being asked to identify those, but it is important to have those when we're doing the graph. Okay, now the last thing that we have to identify is our foci, and we don't have the value of our foci yet. In order to find the value of our foci, we have to use the x squared minus b squared equals c squared. Now that is going to be on your formula sheet that you're allowed to use on your final exam. But it is important that you know what to do with that. So our a squared is 16, our b squared is 4, and that equals c squared. So c squared equals 12. Since c squared equals 12, c equals the square root of 12. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to simplify the square root of 12. So the square root of 12 simplifies to 4 times 3, and we can take the square root of 4, which is 2. So that is 2 on the square root of 3. So our C value is 2 on the square root of 3. Now, if you take the square root of 12, you are going to get a number in between 3 and 4. So that's an approximation of in between 3 and 4. So from my center, I'm going to move up a little over 3. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and right there, that's my foci. And then I'm going to move down 1, 2, 3, a little more than 3. So I have put those dots right there as my foci. But I've got to identify my foci. Now, the one thing I want you to know is I want you to know that my x value isn't going to change. So it's going to stay at -3. Okay? So my foci, the x value of my foci is going to be -3. Then I'm going to take my center value, which is 1, and I am going to add 2 on the square root of 3 to that for one of my foci. Then for my other foci, I am going to subtract 2 on the square root of 3. So our foci is the distance from our center. So this distance in between our center and our foci is 2 on the square root of 3. And the way that I get that point is I add 2 on the square root of 3 to the y value of my center, and then I subtract 2 on the square root of 3 from the y value of my center. And that is how I get my foci. Okay? So those foci, those are things that you need to be sure you've got. So don't hesitate to review that if you need any help with that.